The current levels of pollution that we're all breathing are unacceptable, and we can't tolerate it more because it's killing us.
We deserve clean air now. We deserved it yesterday. Our children deserve it.
This is a paper towel off a screen from my bedroom window that I clean every week. I clean this crap off my window.
The Clairton Coke Works is one of the most toxic industrial facilities in Allegheny County.
I never missed a day running in New York City because the air smelled or because I felt like I had a breathing issue. In Pittsburgh, I've missed too many days to count.
The most livable city in America isn't livable if the air isn't breathable.
So welcome to the fire. Because we've been putting up with U.S. Steel's poor environmental record for 150 years now. My mother, who passed away last year from COPD, she never smoked a cigarette in her life, but we live right here next to U.S. Steel.
Everybody in my family's been riddled with cancer. My brother just died of cancer.
Approximately 130,000 people live within a 5-mile radius of the Coke Works. People in this area have air that's worse than 91% of the entire country.
The children are being sickened. They're developing asthma at a very early age.
I am also the mother of 2, and I fear for my children's and my family's health.
I have a 5-month-old daughter who I'm scared to raise here in the city.
A year and a half ago, I was diagnosed with chronic bronchitis that is likely due to the poor air quality in Pittsburgh.
And I can't understand how there's not enough compassion to put a stop to this.
So welcome to the fire.
If you understand that your child's asthma is approximately the result of Norfolk Southern or is going to be exacerbated by it, then you're going to come to a meeting and raise your voice.
Where petrochemical development occurs, people tend to suffer.
This area has so much more to offer than becoming a cancer alley.
We've got our work cut out for us.
The county health department is in charge of enforcing our Clean Air Act and protecting our health. Do you think they're doing a good job? No!
This anger, anxiety, and frustration are the results of residents enduring decades' worth of air pollution and violations.
It's on us to be bold, and it's also on us to listen to the needs of the people who are here. They are suffering.
Welcome to the fire. 'Cause the bigger they are, the harder they fall. You build your fortress and I'll climb your walls. You got your armor, but I see your flaws. So welcome to the fire.
We are starting to elect politicians who pay attention and fight hard for clean air. And if you do not fight hard for clean air, we're done with you.
We have to hold accountable those who are harming our communities.
So welcome to the fire.
For decades, we have not been able to breathe.
There is a legal and moral obligation to make the county act.
What do we want? Clean air!
Because cancer should not be the cost of breathing in America's most livable city.
Enough is enough. Hi, I'm Howard Rieger, volunteer convener of the Southwestern Pennsylvania Grassroots Air Quality Town Halls, and welcome to our 19th session. Our last town hall focused on the August 11, 2025 disaster at U.S. Steel's 110-year-old Clairton Coke Works, which killed 2 workers and injured 11 others, 5 of them seriously. That tragedy demonstrated, once again, that U.S. Steel is less concerned about the safety of its workers than about wringing additional profits out of its antiquated, poorly maintained facilities. U.S. Steel wants you to believe that closing its Irvin Works hot strip mill in West Mifflin and building a new hot strip mill at the Edgar Thomson Works in Braddock is progress. It isn't. It's a billion-dollar bet on the past made at the expense of the residents of Braddock and environmental justice community, already one of the unhealthiest places to live in America. Here's what U.S. Steel won't tell you. Building the hot strip mill doesn't replace the dangerous infrastructure. Rather, it keeps it in use. The hot strip mill furnaces will be powered by coking gas piped from the Clairton Coke Works to Braddock to power its operations. Coke oven gas often carries that awful, rotten egg smell from sulfur compounds that are not properly removed or contained. And due to a crack in a 75-year-old valve, it was the source of last August's explosion at the Clairton Coke Works. Depending upon an outdated and poorly maintained system, as evidenced by fines levied against U.S. Steel and past company performance, makes its use in a new facility a huge mistake. Tonight, we will hear from experts who will show that the increase in pollution for residents living in Braddock and North Braddock will be significant. Further, given the hot strip mill's proximity to Allegheny County's center of population, thousands of others will be exposed to increased pollution, with all of its attendant health risks. In an era when lip service to well-paying middle-class jobs is the mantra of politicians and public officials, the proposal to build the new hot strip mill will result in a net gain of precisely 0 jobs. U.S. Steel, which once employed 95,000 people in its Mon Valley works, now employs a mere 3,000 steel workers. Real progress will only come when public health and community revitalization are treated as non-negotiable goals. When fundamental strategic priorities shift from fossil fuel-based steelmaking in the Mon Valley to cutting-edge, sustainable, fossil fuel-free technology that will once again provide the job opportunities that will drive population growth. We have all the ingredients for another Pittsburgh Renaissance: world-class universities, healthcare giants, high-tech enterprises, and top corporate leaders. The only thing preventing us from getting there is the absence of leaders who are willing to confront the fact that the fossil-fueled steel industry that built our city and contributed to our peak population of 676,000 in 1950 has led our decline to 308,000 today, 13,000 fewer residents than we had 126 years ago in 1900. Tonight's program includes the following presenters: Dr. Philip Landrigan, the founding director of Boston College's Global Public Health Program, who will apply his methodology for quantifying deaths and adverse health outcomes due to air pollution in Braddock. Qiyam Ansari, Valley Clean Air Now president, who will share portions of the interim report of the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazards Board investigation and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's findings regarding the Clairton explosion and its implications for Braddock. John Graham, senior scientist at Clean Air Task Force, will present estimates of the additional pollution to which Braddock would be exposed from a new hot strip mill. Teri Gilmore, a licensed preacher, a resident of Braddock, and a retired child development professional, will focus on the social determinants of health in Braddock. And finally, we'll hear from Nathan Mallory, a retired U.S. Air Force veteran who is facilities manager at the Veterans Leadership Program, working to ensure safe, adequate housing for homeless military veterans, and a member of North Braddock Borough Council. After the formal presentations, there'll be an opportunity for attendees to ask questions, which you should post in the chat. Dr. Landrigan, it's now your turn to present.
of the impacts of particulate air pollution on disease and death in the 7 counties of the Pittsburgh metropolitan area. So let's start with some general stuff. Air pollution is the largest environmental cause of disease and death in the world. It's the main driver, as Howard has already said, is the combustion of fossil fuels, coal and oil and gas. And the good news is that we know full well, and I'll come back to this at the end of my talk, that air pollution can be controlled. Air pollution is not the unavoidable price of progress. We have developed strategies that are based in law, that are supported by monitoring, that are encouraged by incentives, that have very successfully controlled air pollution. And I want to come back to that at the end and paint a pathway forward. So what are the sources of air pollution? Well, you know them, you live with them. Stationary sources like the steel mills and the coke ovens in Pittsburgh, mobile sources on the highways, and other things like wildfires. This is a close-up picture of particulate air pollution. So here's a human hair going across the slide here. These particles are beach sand. This is PM10. PM10 means it has a diameter of 10 microns. You can see takes about 5 of them to make up the diameter of a hair. And then here's PM2.5, which are only 2.5 microns. So it would take about 20 of them, 5 times 4, 20 of them to make up the diameter of a human hair. So PM10 and certainly PM2.5 are so small that the human eye cannot see them. They're invisible. You can taste them, you can smell them, but you cannot see them. So what do we know about the health effects of air pollution? Well, the health effects were first recognized back in the 1950s when there were massive acute episodes. And one of the one that was closest to home to you in Pittsburgh was the tragedy that occurred in 1948 in Donora, Pennsylvania. There was a zinc plant there that was pumping heavy pollution into the air. During the winter, when there was a thermal inversion, the air pollution got trapped in the valley, and over the span of a week, hundreds of people were made sick and scores of people died. And those episodes were so visible, so shocking, that they changed everybody's perception of air pollution. Up until that time, people thought of air pollution as the smell of money. I heard it described by one person, the smell of money, the price of progress, something you had to put up with. But when big episodes occurred, and the one in London was the worst of all, about 4,000 people died, people realized that it was time to move on and find ways to get away from health pollution. And those episodes led to the passage of clean air legislation in countries around the world, including the United States, and it really jump-started research on air pollution. So here's a picture of the episode in Donora, and you can see it's really pretty awful. So in the years since Donora, many big studies of air pollution have been done in universities in this country, including the University of Pittsburgh. And these studies the way they proceeded is that they have measured levels of air pollution, and then they've correlated levels of air pollution with risk of disease. And generally speaking, what they find is that no surprise, that the worse the air pollution, the greater the risk of disease, but that the risk of disease extends down even to very low levels of exposure, especially when it comes to kids. So in adults, we now know that air pollution causes heart disease and stroke, causes chronic lung disease like chronic bronchitis, it causes high blood pressure, it causes diabetes, and there's emerging evidence that it's linked to dementia. In children, it causes low birth weight, premature birth, stillbirth, in other words, death of the unborn child within the womb, asthma, and IQ loss, which is the result of brain injury. The brain is very sensitive to lead, especially in infancy, but also in old age. In adults, as I mentioned, PM2.5 exposure is linked to dementia. And in kids, PM2.5 is linked to IQ loss, to memory problems, to a smaller brain volume, which is not a good thing. and increased risk of problems like attention deficit disorder and autism. Always the worst exposures are the most dangerous, but any exposure carries risk. So here are the top line findings from our study of air pollution in the Pittsburgh area. What we found was that air pollution the average was 8.54 micrograms per cubic meter of air. That's just barely below the current federal standard of 9. And it makes Pittsburgh one of the most heavily polluted cities across the United States. And of course, pollution is not evenly distributed across the 7 counties of Pittsburgh. That 8.54 number is only an average. In Braddock, levels were as high as 15. And in other more fortunate places, the levels were substantially lower. That 15 there is Braddock. We calculated that in 2019, and I should explain why we looked at 2019. It was the last full year before COVID. We didn't want to do the COVID years. And then the more recent years, the data were not yet fully available. So even though we understand that we would like to look at a more recent year, 2019 was the best year that we had available. And we figured in 2019 between 2,900 and 3,800 deaths, which is about between 10 and 13% of all the deaths in the Pittsburgh metropolitan area were due to PM 2.5 pollution. Very substantial number. We also found in that same year that PM 2.5 pollution caused 226 premature births, 176 babies with low birth weight, and 12 stillbirths. And that it was responsible for the loss of more than 60,000 IQ points among the 24,000 babies born in the Pittsburgh area that year. So that's about 2.5 IQ points per child, but again, not evenly distributed, with the greatest losses per child in the most polluted areas, again, like Braddock. And IQ loss translates to economic loss because children who lose IQ earn less money across their lifetimes. This has been well shown by the economists. And we therefore calculated that that loss of 60,000 IQ points in that crop of babies born in Pittsburgh in 2019 is going to result in an economic loss across those children's lifetimes over the next 75 years or so of $2.7 billion. That's money that we're basically wasting because of air pollution exposure to pregnant mothers and young children. And I want to point out that most of these effects occurred at air pollution levels below the EPA standard. What you have to understand here is that the EPA standard is a compromise. Any standard, like the air pollution standard, is a compromise between what would really protect health and what the industry says is feasible. When EPA sets a standard, they have a very complicated process. They hear from all parties. The industry is in there with multiple lawyers and fancy flow charts standing up against the people, and they will always argue that they will whine and complain that they cannot reduce air pollution below a certain level. And even though we know that damage occurs below the standard, that is as low as we've been able to get it through the political process up until now. And some of you may actually be aware that the current Trump administration is proposing to raise that standard. In other words, to roll it back and kick it up to 12 micrograms, which would substantially increase the burden of disease and death in Pittsburgh and across the United States. So how do our findings compare to other studies? Well, the Breathe Project did a study in Allegheny County in 2018, a year before our year. They got very similar findings. They found that air pollution was responsible for about 12%. We figured between 10 and 13%, so we're pretty much the same. We also showed that the highest rates of disease and death were in the region's most highly polluted census tracts, especially south and east of Pittsburgh, including Braddock. And that lines up with the findings of previous studies that have shown high levels of black carbon, high levels of benzene in those areas, studies that have been done by people like Dr. Albert Presto at, I believe he's at Carnegie Mellon. Here's Dr. Presto's map, and you can see that the heaviest pollution follows the river valleys. And here's benzene down by the Clairton Coke Works. Benzene is a potent air pollutant, causes leukemia, causes lymphoma in both children and adults. So the way forward, that picture is a clue, is to clean up the air and get away from fossil fuels and save lives and save money. We know how to do this. We passed the Clean Air Act in 1970. Interestingly, it was signed by Richard Nixon. And since that time, air pollution in the USA has come down by 77%. Here's a picture of Cleveland, Ohio, which I know well because I did my internship there at Cleveland Metropolitan General Hospital. And this picture was taken a few blocks from my hospital in 1968, which is the year I was there as an intern. It's not my picture, it's a stock picture, but it's right in the neighborhood where I was working. And here is Cleveland today, for those of you who've been over there to see the baseball game. And we've all heard the story that controlling pollution is going to kill the economy. That is simply not true. This is a graph that puts the lie to that statement. This line here, this line that starts in 1970 and goes out to 2015, is air pollution in the United States. And you can see air pollution has come down by 75% since we passed the Clean Air Act. And in the same time, the gross domestic product, in other words, the US economy, grew by 250%. So it is simply not true that cleaning up air pollution kills the economy. It's just not true. So with that, I will conclude. I know other folks want to present, and I don't want to hog the time. So thank you very much, and I'll be around for questions at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Landrigan, very much. And now we have Qiyam Ansari from VCAN.
Hello, everyone. Just give me one moment to share my screen. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us tonight. My name is Qiyam Ansari. I'm the Executive Director of Valley Clean Air Now. We are a small nonprofit located in Glassport. We focus on changing some of the policies around air pollution here locally. We have an air purifier program, and we partner with institutions to research the air quality. Tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about the incident that took place last year, August 11th, 2025, when there was an explosion down at the Clairton Coke Works. We think it's important to talk about this because, you know, this new facility that's being built in Edgar Thomson is going to feed from the Clairton Coke Works. All right. So on August 11th, 2025, a cloud of coke oven gas ignited at the U.S. Steel Clairton Coke Works. 2 workers were killed, 5 more were seriously injured, and 6 others were hurt. I want to walk you through what the Chemical Safety Board found because the story it tells isn't really about one broken valve. It's about a set of decisions made over decades that put people directly in the path of a known hazard. And let me start with what that hazard actually is. Coke oven gas is toxic and it's explosive. It's a hazardous air pollutant. It's roughly 60% hydrogen, 20% methane. And the gas is piped through the plant every single day. And it's the gas that filled the transfer area before it exploded. And look at what this explosion did. That is not a small fire. That is a vapor cloud explosion. The gas accumulates, it finds an ignition source, and it detonates. The black plume was visible for miles. Now, here's what you need to understand about where people were standing when this happened. 4 workers were inside buildings in the 13th and 14th transfer area at the moment of the explosion, and you can see them down there. 2 were in a break room, and one of them was each in the 2 reversing rooms, which are the control rooms for batteries 13 and 14. So those are directly above. One managed. So both reversing room workers were killed, unfortunately. One was thrown into a roadway by the blast. The other was buried in debris and wasn't located for 9 hours. The 2 break room workers were severely injured. One managed to free himself and get help, and the other was buried and wasn't rescued for hours. These were the company buildings, break rooms, control rooms, and places where people were meant to be, and they sat directly on top of a hazard. So as you can see in this picture above, the rooms are right above the reversing room 14 and 13. As you can see in the picture, they're completely decimated. And these were where the workers were when the explosion took place. So how did the gas get out? Here's the sequence. The battery 13 isolation valve was leaking, and US Steel actually discovered a coke oven gas leak on July 8th. That's more than a month before the explosion. On July 28th, they held a meeting to review the hazards of shutting down battery 13. And on August 11th, the crews went to work on that valve. This valve, by the way, was built in 1953, cast iron. They brought in a high-pressure pump truck and started flushing the valve with water to lower the gates. To close it, the valve got stuck. When they couldn't reopen it, workers heard a pop. The gas monitor started alarming. They radioed an evacuation call, and less than 1 minute before the explosion happened. Just 1 minute. When the investigators recovered that battery 13 isolation valve, they found it had been cracked catastrophically. It was literally split in half. The 70-plus-year-old cast iron valve under pressure failed and released a cloud of explosive gas into the condensed space where people were working and where the occupied building sat directly above the piping. And you can see the damage that it caused above. So the Chemical Safety Board released a report about siting at the facility. This is where the Chemical Safety Board's findings get hard to hear, because this is the part that was preventable long before August 11th. The basic principle of the facility siting is simple, and the industry has known for decades to keep people and occupied buildings away from hazards. If you can't design buildings to protect the people inside of them, and if you can't do that carefully and manage how to find people that are in harm's way, it isn't really a French theory, and it's spelled out in a guidance from OSHA and the Chemical Safety Board process program, and US Steel essentially did not do that. What they did instead was they placed multiple buildings that were occupied directly above the 18-inch pipes carrying coke oven gas. And when the explosion came, every building in the 13th, 14th transfer area was destroyed. US Steel had conducted multiple process hazard analysis of the coke oven gas system, and they intentionally excluded facility siting from those studies. This wasn't an oversight. In 2003, their own analysis produced a recommendation to address the siting, and management rejected it. The company's written response essentially said that they decided that the existing safety measures were adequate, that it wasn't necessary to act on that recommendation. That was 22 years before this explosion. And I want to be clear, this is a pattern that did not stop after the blast. US Steel is relocating battery 13 and 14 control room workers to a new building, and that building is not blast resistant. There's no formal siting evaluation that has been done, and 4 other coke batteries at this plant still have occupied buildings near the coke oven gas piping right now. So, what were the recommendations, and what is the timeline for the Chemical Safety Board process with this facility? The Chemical Safety Board has issued an interim recommendations telling US Steel to do the siting evaluation for every occupied building at the site and to actually fix the hazards that it finds. And the investigation is still ongoing. But I'll leave you with this. The Chemical Safety Board laid out a timeline of the facility siting disasters that they've investigated. Sierra Chemical Concept Sciences right here in Pennsylvania, BP Texas facility with 15 dead and 180 injured. Alongside that timeline runs decades of guidance and regulation built significantly to predict the deaths. Every tool needed to prevent that what happened in Clairton existed, and the standards existed, the guidance existed, and the 2003 recommendations existed. What was missing was a decision to act on any of it. 2 people are dead because the company decided over and over that the hazard sitting underneath the workers' feet wasn't worth addressing. That is why a community right to know matters, because when people making these decisions won't hold themselves accountable, we have to. Thank you.
Thank you, Qiyam. And now we have Dr. John Graham.
Okay. Does everything
looks good
there? Great. Thanks, everyone. It's good to be here today to talk to you about some of the implications of the moving of the production from the urban plant to Edgar Thomson with a new steel hot strip mill in Braddock. I'm going to start with some data because I like data, and air quality is really where it's at, what I look at. And so we're going to focus on some of the air quality data that's being measured in the community and in the surrounding area in Pittsburgh. And then we'll talk about some of the emissions changes and what those implications will be for changing in the air quality and how that affects the trends. So this is PM 2.5. It's probably the most severe pollutant that folks are exposed to in the Mon Valley. And this is what Dr. Landrigan talked about. You can see that this is the last 10 years worth of data from 4 sites in Pittsburgh. We've got the Liberty site, which has traditionally been the worst pollution site in the region and one of the worst in the country. You can see that's the orange line on top. And then you can see also North Braddock is in green, and that's a little bit less polluted. And you've got the Parkway East, which is located along a roadway. So it's really looking at traffic pollution. And Lawrenceville is the cleanest of these sites. And it is sort of an urban core area. So it's what folks who live in an urban area like Pittsburgh will be exposed to. And you can see that, like Dr. Landrigan said, we definitely know how to reduce air pollution. We don't have to live with it. And when we design programs that limit it, that's where we see this improvement. So over the course of this decade, you can see, in sort of in the first half of this period, before the pandemic in 2020, there was a differential between the PM that was being measured at Liberty and what was being measured in North Braddock of about 2 micrograms. After the pandemic, that started to close, and that's because there have been some reductions in emissions in the Clairton from the U.S. Steel facility there. And that sort of in the 2021 to 2023 period, we were seeing the difference between those 2 sites was down to 1.4 micrograms. And if you look at 2025, which is the most recent data that's available, there's no longer a difference between the air pollution PM 2.5 being measured in Liberty and North Braddock for annual average. And that, I think, is really remarkable given what we know about the history of pollution. So we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on there. We can also look at SO2 as another trace gas that's measured in at the North Braddock air quality site that the county maintains, and compare that to the measurements that are taken at the Liberty Monitor and also at Lawrenceville. And what you'll see is in the so the before the pandemic time, the region didn't meet the standard, which is 75, and now the region does comply with the standard. You can see that there was a pretty big differential between Liberty and North Braddock, and then they implemented controls, and you saw the decrease. And also remember, in 2018 there was a fire in December, and there were some implications for that and emissions of SO2 before, but we can clean up what's going on. Notice sort of in this period with the North Braddock monitor, it was a little bit over 60 on average for the hourly values, the peak hourly values. And more recent years, it's a little bit around the 55 part per billion range. So it's gone down by 6 or 8 parts per billion over this period of time. You can compare that to the measurements that are being taken at Lawrenceville, and they're around 8 or so. So it's about an order of magnitude less. So this is what you'd see if you did not have a source in your immediate community versus what you do have when you do have sources of SO2 in the community. One of the things that I look at when I try to evaluate what's going on with air quality is comparing across sites. And here I'm comparing days when there are inversions and days when there aren't inversions. And we look at the inversion statistics because it helps us determine how much of the pollution that is local versus how much is coming from upwind. So the pollution that's local is the stuff that you might have an opportunity to address and reduce in a community, whereas stuff that's transported from out of state, you can't really address on your own. So you can see in these green bars, I'm looking at 2 periods for 3 different sites. It's the same sites that we looked at the first figure: Lawrenceville, Liberty, North Braddock. And this is the annual average for days in green when there's not an inversion. It's 7.4 and 6.7 for these two-year periods at Lawrenceville. It's 8.6 and 6.9 at Liberty, and 8.1 and 7.3 for North Braddock. And what you'll notice is that there is a downward trend, which we saw in that first figure. There is some changes happening, that the actual pollution is going down over time. And you have, you can look at the differences between these different sites. And here, this difference between 8.6 at Liberty and 7.4, that really represents the minimum amount of extra pollution that's coming from a local source. And you can see North Braddock, like on those trend lines from the first figure, is in between. There's a little bit more pollution on average in North Braddock than there is at Lawrenceville, and even more at Liberty. In 2023, the Coke Works closed the most polluting lines that they have. And we saw, as a result of that, I think, at least this is my assumption, we don't actually have the data from the county yet or from US Steel to know exactly what their emissions are for this period. But you can see, we know, and they announced those closures in spring 2023. And this green bar has really dropped quite substantially. And that is due primarily to local emission drops. You can see that there's a drop for these other 2 areas as well, and it's much smaller. And that's likely mostly due to regional changes and air coming into the region over this period. But also, I'm guessing that some of the reduction that happened because of the Clairton reduction in emissions is being seen also in these other further downwind areas in the county. The colored bars represent pretty much only emissions that are local. So all this stuff in the yellow and red happen on inversion days when you have trapping of pollution that is local. And when you have an inversion, you don't have vertical mixing. So it means that you have a cap on what's happening. So when you emit pollution from the surface, it doesn't have anywhere to go. It just sits right where it is, and it accumulates for however long the inversion is in place and for how long the emissions are happening at the surface. And you can see that that process is fairly small in Lawrenceville, where the main, it's mainly traffic and sort of day-to-day what happens in an urban area. So you can see that this is not a huge additional amount of pollution compared to the baseline values. But at Liberty, you can see that this was a factor of 2 more on a day. So this means that all this pollution up here is just locally generated. And you can see that the before and after, we had a pretty substantial decrease due to decreases in the baseline emissions. And that is also somewhat apparent here in the North Braddock site, but not to the same extent. So I think that it's likely that some of this could be due to emission reductions in North Braddock, but probably also some of this is because the facility is so substantial here, and there's some contribution from the reductions at Clairton that happened in at North Braddock. So that's sort of where we're coming from, where we've got levels of pollution that are right around the standard but still too polluted for PM 2.5, somewhat below the standard for SO2. But what we know will happen is if we add more emissions to this mix, it's not going to be a positive thing. We're going to increase what's going on, and we're going to increase the pollution in the neighborhoods. And this table right here is one of the tables from the permit that is submitted for this new build at Edgar Thomson. And I've highlighted, you've got SO2 emissions. There's an additional, they're expecting around 250, 260 tons per year additional SO2. Here they show 22 extra tons of PM 2.5. And they're claiming that because they're moving some of the processes from Irvin to Edgar Thomson, they're going to reduce the emissions at the Irvin plant, and therefore the net change is going to be very small, so nothing to worry about. And that's really, kind of like hiding the ball. It is a benefit to the folks that live really in the downwind field of Irvin, but it really is not a benefit to the folks here that live around the Edgar Thomson plant. One of the things about these emissions estimates, it's hard to really gauge exactly what they're going to be and what those changes are going to be. You can look at it yet a different slide in the permit, and you can see they're saying that the emission changes at Edgar Thomson are going to be 36 tons per year for PM 2.5, not 24. And this 262 additional tons of SO2 is similar to what they had on the previous slide for 257, but that gives us an order of what the emission changes are. The county reports on their dashboard emissions over a time period. And here I've excerpted sort of 2016 to 2022, which is the range similar to the data that presented in the first two slides. And you can see the tons of emissions from Clairton, from Edgar Thomson and Irvin for PM and SO2. And just to put it in context, what is this 262 thereabouts additional SO2 emissions going to mean? And you can see that if we look at the emissions for Edgar Thomson around 2022, if you were to add that 262 back to it, you're moving back almost a decade to what the emissions were for SO2 in the middle of the previous decade. And likewise, if you add 36 tons of emissions for the PM 2.5 and you look at where we are recently, a little over 100, we're going to move back to this era of 150 or more tons of PM 2.5. And so that we saw that nice downward trend where we were 10 years ago versus where we are today. And essentially what this hot strip mill would do would be push us back 10 years in the past. And we can see where we came from. So all those gains that we saw, we're likely to see them reverse back to 10 years ago. So we have the CREATE lab at CMU who's done some really great work. They've modeled this additional PM 2.5 emissions. They modeled 36 additional tons per year of PM 2.5. And you can see the before and after. On the left-hand side is the before pattern of where that PM ends up, and the right-hand side is the after. And you can see the scale here. And the orange and red is 2 to 3 micrograms of PM from this facility. And then you have lesser amounts, but it's a pretty expansive range. And you can see how that area, it expands all the way up to both of these bends in the river when you get to the after picture. And that's pretty important. And the measurement, the North Braddock site is somewhere north of this. The stars where the Edgar Thomson facility is, North Braddock measurement site is here. So it's in that really high impact zone of higher than 3. And I think that this modeling would show about an extra microgram of PM is going to end up at that site if we were to emit what this new strip mill is planning on adding to the atmosphere. And what does that mean for people? In the end, that's really what we're concerned about. And these are statistics, again, that the Crate Lab put together. And you can see in this top block, we've got the before and after. We've got the zones over 3, over 2, over 1, and the number of people that live in those zones and the demographic makeup of those people. It's a fairly low income area, and it's high Black population. And it's just, I mean, 70% of the population, that really high impact zone, are Black residents. And, you know, and even in the after time when it expands that zone, it's still huge disproportionate representation of lower income Black residents. And then demographically, you can look at the differences between the county as a whole and the folks who live around the urban works and compare that to the folks who live around Edgar Thomson. You can see that urban works is fairly similar to what the total population in the whole county is, but there's it's not only many more people live in this area, this is within 2 miles of these facilities. You can see that a lot more people, it's more densely populated, and the demographics change. So it's a more disadvantaged population that will be impacted. So this is not a positive for the folks that live in Edgar Thomson. It's really asking them to go back at least a decade to pollution levels that were present 10 years ago. So that's the summary of what I have today. And
hey, John.
Yeah.
We're going to go to questions at the very end, but there was one that just popped in, I think is maybe very important and relevant that folks understand before you move on or before we move to the next speaker. You had 2 maps, left and right, with concentric rings on them. What was the difference between the left-hand and right-hand side? The rings look similar-ish, but I'm sure I'm missing something. Yeah,
sorry. Yeah. So the left-hand side is the existing emissions, around 2023 emissions, and the right-hand side is what happens when you add the extra 36 tons of PM emissions with the hot strip mill. So really it's showing an expansion of the zones. So the number of people that are in these zones increases, and the size of each of these impact zones gets a bit larger. So you can just compare the relative amount. And it's almost a doubling of the number of people in this red zone versus this red zone. So when we go over here, you get twice as many people that are in the really hot zone. And same thing with the orange zone. You're really doubling the population.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, it's quite substantial.
Yep. Super. Thanks for reemphasizing that point, and thank you very much for your presentation. Next up, we have Miss Teri Gilmore. And
Hello.
Teri, I've got a couple slides for you. Just let me know when you want me to play them.
You can put up the first one we discussed. Hello, everyone. Konnichiwa in Japanese.
Oh, hold on just one second. John, can you remove your sharing screen?
I'm trying to.
I'll see if I can do it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Konnichiwa. So I don't have a lot of slides. I'm glad I didn't put slides together because it would have been a duplication. But what I want to say is most religions encourage us to respect life and land. And in Japanese, it's anon to daichi o shuazo shuri. And that means Japanese people respect themselves first. They respect others. They respect authority, including the creator. They respect the environment, nature. They respect education and learning. And as we're on this podcast, we're learning more about what is harming us. To me, that goes against what is very standard and highly regarded in Japanese culture, which is respect. Respect one's own property and the property of others. That's highly regarded in Japanese culture. First, let me start by saying that in no way am I saying that anyone should not make a living. But what I do want to question is making a living acceptable if it is not sustainable, right? Is the production sustainable or is it not sustainable? So as they stated, my name is Teri Gilmore, and I live in an environmental justice community, which is Braddock. I grew up in the city of Pittsburgh, have been out here 40 years. I've been in my home 34 years, and I really did not have the language that I have now for being in an environmental desert or environmental justice community. So what are communities that have environmental hazards that are high? Social inequalities, which we've seen and heard that from the speakers prior. They have high health risk and low environmental benefits. And what we want to do is see those benefits increase, right? And we want to see the environmental hazards decrease, and we want to see the social inequalities decrease and the health risks to decrease, right? So that's why I have this picture here so that you can focus on the Japanese culture, right? When you're listening to what it is that we want from them. I thought that when Nihon Steel partnered with and or took over United States Steel, I thought that that would increase the standards because of their high regard for respect of land and people and others. So social determinants of health, what are they? They are conditions which people, and we are human beings, right? We need to use the word human beings more often because I think when we hear the word people, we usually see pictures or still persons and not realizing that they are human beings that breathe and live. So social determinants of health are conditions in which people are born into, people live in, they work in, they play in, some worship in them, and hopefully if it's healthy enough, they can age in, right? So we want to age out of our homes, not be carried out of our homes. We've already heard about the impact of these particular matters, right? That affect our air quality. They affect our water, right? We know that Pennsylvania has the highest percentage of cancer. We have 475 to 504 in a percentage of 100,000 cases, right? So we're really moving fast with those numbers, and we want those numbers to reduce. We've already heard about asthma. I work with children and families for 40 years. I'm still indirectly concerned about their well-being, right? And so therefore, asthma needs to reduce. I remember when I had my family child care, which was registered through the Commonwealth, and the health department contacted all of the family child cares or child care centers in our area, and were asking about incidents of asthma. So I remember when that became a concern and people were really, really worried about it. And we know that asthma is not natural, that God made us, right, to be able to be compatible with the environment that he produced for us to live in. And it is through man's hands that that environment is no longer compatible. We've heard the statistics. Thank you, Dr. Phillip. Thank you, Qiyam. Thank you, Dr. John. All of those statistics. We know that bronchitis increases. We know that there's an increase of colon and rectal health disease. We know that there's kidney and renal and pelvis disease. We know about melanoma, the skin disease. All of these are happening at higher rates within Allegheny County, and more importantly, in the areas that are affected by United States Steel. And let's remember, they say in their culture to respect themselves and others, right? Okay, so now I want to talk about, let's see, learning disabilities. Because of these pollutants, we're seeing an increase in learning disabilities. The levels of lead that's in the water and the air, and the children 6 and under are really showing an increase. So we know if it begins in them at an earlier age, it's going to extend throughout their lifetime, that their IQ is coming in low at an early age, which makes it even harder for them to retain the information as they get older, right? It delays their physical growth just as well as their cognitive and neurological growth. We see an increase in hyperactivity, detention, what they call it ADHD. I apologize for that. ADHD and mood changes are even increasing their irritability, right? And we want all of that to go down. We need them as they move forward to respect. And I'm going to keep saying the words that are important in Nihon's culture, right? Respect. We need them to increase the respect that they have for us. I really want them to come in and not join our standards, but increase our standards in production, right? We want the Clean Air Act of 1970 to do even more, and we want to see better increases now that they are in charge of these plants. We want to limit where they say, okay, if you sign on and you take this money, you cannot take it again. That affects somebody's social determinant of health. Why? Because let's say that they missed work whenever that plant explosion occurred, or any other adverse actions from the plant, and then they take whatever compensation that they're given because it may make up for what they lost, and then they're penalized and you cannot take it another time. Well, if you hit me 10 times, I should be able to say ouch 10 times. I should not only be able to say ouch once, and then that gives you unlimited access to hitting me. It doesn't make logical sense, right? So social determinants of health, they affect our health. right? They send you to the doctors more. If you're going to the doctors more and more and more, then that means your income is going to eventually reduce. Why? Because you'll eventually use up your sick days. You'll eventually use up your flex days. And if you continue on, you may lose your job. If you lose your job and your income, you may not be able to pay your rent and or your mortgage. And therefore, next thing you know, you're not going to be able to pay for your vehicle. And if all of that happens and you have so much negativity happening, you lose your self-worth. And we don't want to lose our self-worth. There's nothing in the Japanese culture that facilitates losing your self-worth or taking the self-worth of another, right? So with that being said, I have a shopping list of environmental benefits that we would like to see increase in our community. We want protection from the pollution. We're not saying don't produce, but can you produce in a sustainable way? We want restoration of our health and of our environment. We want to be sustained within our environment. We don't want to be carried out of our homes. We want to age in our homes with decency and respect. We want the human context, right, to be respected through clean air. Let's increase the human health outcomes, right? Let's reduce respiratory diseases. Let's reduce cardiovascular diseases. Let's reduce the cancers. When we deal with the water, we want to see our drinking water increase in its standard, in its taste, right? We want to know when we're drinking it that we are not drinking ourselves into the grave. We want to know our cooking water is healthy. We want to know that the water we bathe in is healthy because if it's touching our skin, which is an organ, it can be affected. Now let's look at the land. Is there any runoff that will affect us? Because people want to enjoy horticulture. Some people have home gardens. They want to know if they plant next to their homes that the crops that come up are healthy, right? They want to know that if I grow this apple tree, when I first moved in this area, there were a lot of fruit trees. You don't see them anymore. They want to know that their children can play outside safely, that they can play in the dirt and not necessarily come home with some type of environmental hazard on their clothes and in their nostrils, their ears, and their eyes. We want the pollution to go down. All of those are environmental benefits that we look forward to having. Lastly and not least, I ask you again to consider producing steel in whatever products you make in the industry, because we don't know who's on the line, to produce it in a sustainable way. We want you to remember that our lives are important to us and that we want to live them with as much decency as possible. We want to make income. I would not want to contribute to someone's demise while making money. The ecosystem does include the power plant, but it also includes human beings. Thank you and arigato.
Thank you so much, Teri. Thank you, Miss Teri. Oh yeah, there's the last slide. There we go.
We want to go forward. We don't want to go backward. We want to see them grow into healthy young women and boys. Amen. Men and boys, men and women. Oh goodness. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you, Miss Teri. And finally, we have Nathan Mallory here. And it looks like you're all ready, Nathan. And I'll just make you the spotlight. There we go.
All right, can you hear me? Just a quick test.
Perfectly.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I do want to thank everybody for giving me, the opportunity to learn, also to figure out ways to take a very complicated topic and kind of break it down into what is becomes, kind of this actionable thing. Like, what can we do about it? Introduce myself. My name is Nathan Mallory. I recently got elected to North Braddock Borough Council in January. So I am joining a council, brand new. There is some documents that I shared with the facilitator of some of the things that happened within the first 8 months of me being on council. A lot of the way this has been managed on Borough Council has been through the last 45 days, where we got a request to permit sanitation line hookup. So we've been talking a lot about the hot strip mill and the pollution generations of that. The project as a whole also involves a granulator machine that will recycle the slag, There's also a wastewater treatment facility with direct discharge to the Mon Valley, or I'm sorry, the Monongahela River, to include all of the rainwater and pollution permitting through DEP. So where it really gets confusing is as a borough council, there's 9 of us, we're all volunteers. We all have day jobs. I don't have a chief of staff. I don't have a legislative assistant. We have a solicitor that keeps us within the Robert's Rules of Order. We have a very small bandwidth as far as what borough council can manage, and it does affect a lot of people. This is the things in borough council. We manage trash, we manage, the building inspections and all the things that your borough council or city council representatives manage. But then they put a application permit that is an air quality permit in front of us and say, hey, take a look at this, and I need to I need an answer within 30 days as to whether or not we can be permitted to hook to this utility in support of the hot strip mill. So in turn, we all kind of just went, we don't know nothing about this. So imagine 2 years ago, when Napon was first making the merger, that went, and now we're at 1 year of formal merger. They've been making plans for a real long time. They gave North Braddock Borough Council 30 days to put it to the community, to find diligence, to find out what people wanted to know. You guys have sat through a presentation today that gave so much information in one spectrum of that, because the way that this topic is talked about, it's kind of the big circles versus little circles. And the reason why this is so important to me personally is there's so many awesome people in our community that deserve to have an opinion. In the 33,000 people that live within the 2 miles of this Edgar Thomson plant, everybody is used as collateral. Everybody's a barter. Our health is a barter to this development. And what we're running into is the Allegheny County Health Department manages the air quality permitting, Department of Environmental Protection through Pennsylvania, manage the wastewater treatment, and we end up getting all of these different process controls. Like, what are their notices? How can they, how much time do we have to get the community out and get them, for us to learn, for us to be able to get out into the community and hand out newsletters and figure out who the advocates are. My takeaway to this is, or my one bit to offer is, the politician is seldom the subject matter expert. The elected official is seldom the subject matter expert. And I know there's a lot of elected officials out there that want to play that game. I'll tell you, being on Borough Council in North Braddock, it matters how we do this. It matters for our community. It matters for people that have never showed up, because everybody has a story you know nothing about. What creates the Environmental Justice District isn't just income and housing stock. It's people. It's our people, it's our generational wealth or generational poverty. It's our generational trauma or it's our generational resilience. It all can go any which way, and it all identifies as a name here. And using public health, our air quality, our access to quality land and water, and being asked to permit the development of a sewage line connection, that's our only vote in North Braddock. Braddock and North Braddock both have to vote to allow for the sewage line connection. And that's it. After this vote is pushed, in whichever way on Borough Council, everything is pushed to the county and state. So then we're showing up and advocating with all of the people on this call to show up to the health department and ask for those protections through environmental justice, which is 2 community meetings that are technical meetings where community members can ask questions. And rather than 30-day notice, public notice, they offer us 45. So an update on that, Allegheny County Health Department has offered to facilitate those technical permitting town halls in our community. So that is something that we started out the gate, attending last month's Board of Health meeting. Then we showed up to the Air Quality Advisory Commission, asked for the same thing. And it was really just, we're organizing and we're learning. You know, as North Braddock residents, we don't have a lot of capacity in the community development space. We don't have clubs hanging out and waiting to tell people everything. We have people that are going to work and doing the best they can. So when we get a project like this and we have to lift it up as high as we can, organizations that are long-standing in our region, North Braddock Residents for Our Future, it's actually where I met Miss Teri at the Clairton OSHA briefing a couple of months ago. And it's these types of things where we just constantly have to learn how to do this the best we can. And it doesn't involve just me. I can talk about the 33,000 people that live within the 2 miles of Edgar Thomson Plant. Everyone needs to be talking about the big circles of US Steel and the Mon Valley Works, because it does affect everybody. I'll just share a couple of quick dates, and then I'll kind of bow out because I want to jump in on questions. I got some too. You know, and the ask for us, as far as putting a direct reduction furnaces, replacing the coke ovens is the answer. And that costs money. $2.5 billion is a lot of money. So that's it can be corrected by replacing the coke oven, isolating it into the Edgar Thomson plant, increasing our concentrations of PM 2.5, and doubling the increased contacts of the Irvin Works is a talking point now. And that sucks. Because I'm not trying to make a divisive agenda towards, well, what about me? But it is true. What about us? We live in this valley. We look at this valley. They're our neighbors. We love our neighbors. We want to support our neighbors. And the only way that, for me, being on council is getting the information out, finding these meetings, finding these town halls, finding these working groups, and having an ask. And as of right now, July 6th coming up, we're having a meet and greet potluck. The flyer was shared. That's North Braddock Residents for Our Future showing up. We paint signs white, and then we take them to the Braddock Arts Crawl, and then we pitch it as make a sign, make a nice sign, I heart bus, make a mean sign, pollution kills, just make a sign, care about something. So that has been a tremendous opportunity for us to meet our neighbors, to talk to our neighbors, to create art with them. And again, that's North Braddock Residents for Our Future. That's their flagship push for the information share. The newsletter was created by them with a lot of these meetings with the talking points. If you want something fun to read about North Braddock taxation and the mill reassess the land, and North Braddock doesn't get taxes for 2.5 years is the baseline. They created a credit of 5 years. So for 2.5 years, we have to take $86,000 out of our operational budget. So as these things go, it's just one lump after another, because everything comes as whatever they say. We got to figure out what they didn't say. And that's tough. So July 6th, we're prepping for the potluck. We're prepping for the Braddock Art Crawl for July 10th. So if you're around, that's also the day that the East Parkway Bridge is the first day of shutting down. So that's a day to celebrate in one fashion or another. But Braddock Art Crawl is July 10th. Braddock Council meeting is July 14th. At their last meeting, they tabled the vote to approve the sewage line connection because they wanted the community meetings. They weren't going to vote on it until they got enough information and enough community members got involved for that to become for them to make a vote on something that they know something more about. And then North Braddock Borough Council meeting is July 21st. All those meetings are public, and you'll disclose if you live in the community or not. The reality is our counselors are made, it's made up of people that do care. I think a lot of what we end up seeing is a lot of people, showing up matters at these things. There's not a lot of people that go to a borough council meeting. I did see on the chat it's 6:30 for North Braddock Borough Council. Teri, when's Braddock Council? 7? I'll ask Teri. Will have to confirm.
Braddock Council is every second Tuesday.
Yeah, it's the 4th. Do you know what time? Is it at 7?
7 p.m. Yes.
Okay. So those are the two that have a municipal vote. Now, fence line communities, if we want to jump into that, which is North for Sales, Turtle Creek, a whole bunch of other communities that border it, that also, they don't have a vote in a way that isn't just getting advocacy from the health department and DEP. So I'm going to leave that there. So please, I'll stick around and listen to questions. Teri, thank you so much for coming in as a community. You're the reason we're all here, right? You're the neighbor we want to take care of. So, taking this from science all the way to the people is a phenomenal resource for all of us. And we will continue to organize and continue to learn.
Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. And thank you to all the speakers and presenters tonight who shared their thoughts and their information and insights tonight. We have now time for some Q&A, and we have several questions in the chat. I would encourage everybody to go to the chat. There is a lot of information in there about upcoming events, actions that people can take, all sorts of things. So definitely check out the chat. And you can also, usually you can download the chat through selecting the 3 dots. Yeah, you can save chat to your computer if you want to. So up at the top of your screen and on your computer, there's 3 dots, and you can say save chat, and it'll save on your computer. One of the so I'd like to move now to Q&A. I'm going to remove your spotlight, Nathan, or add everybody's spotlight. Actually, maybe I'll do that instead. I'll just make all the speakers spotlighted. And then I may add or remove you as each question is relevant to each of you. So don't be offended if I drop you from the view. Let's see, what's it we got? Sorry, Qiyam, I'm looking for you. Oh, maybe, where did Qiyam go? Oh, we have a question. Looks like it might be that Qiyam has stepped away. Okay. One of the first questions / comments from Mayor Mary Nesby. Japan has demonstrated that modern steel production can operate under much stricter environmental oversight and with significantly better air quality outcomes than what we continue to experience here in the Mon Valley. If Nippon Steel has access to those technologies and standards, why is it proposing to expand operations in communities that already bear a disproportionate pollution burden? If their technology is cleaner, like they claim, why was the Mon Valley selected instead of investing in communities that already enjoy cleaner air? So I'm not sure if anybody in our panel would like to tackle that. Howard, I'm going to add you to here.
Yeah, I would just jump in and say, yes, Nippon Steel owns US Steel. It's the same management team running the company. It's David Burritt who got $150 million when the company was sold, and he's still the CEO. So, it's like, what do you expect? They have just let that group of management team run that place.
And as much as I hate to say it, I do believe that people being poor and or people of color, people that they don't consider are important to the society, is why they chose the area that they chose as well. And again, I would still challenge them to utilize the standards that they utilize in Japan, and that they show us the same respect that they would show themselves. I will continue to say that, and hopefully, as I say it, it'll start to hit home.
Well, thank you, Ms. Teri, and thank you for, I'm sorry, Mary Nesby here, for the question. It just concerns me, and thank you, Howard, for helping me to understand that those same individuals are still running a company, which would make sense now. But I feel like as elected officials and organizations, and we have all of these, all of these environmental protection agencies from the federal all the way down, that we need to be fighting to make sure there is a change within that regime. You hear what I'm saying? Because if the same individuals are managing now that was managing then, and we were getting better, and now we're going to go, this will take us 20 years, 30 years back. We should be fighting that those people are gone, right? That they're being removed. Just as an elected official, you get your 2 years, you get your 4 years. Like, we have to fight against that thing right there, right? That old good old boys thing that continues to happen in these marginalized communities.
And I would also want to encourage all civic groups, all religious organizations to step in and speak up. The separation of church and state does not mean you can't have a voice at your local government, at your state government, and at your federal government, and even at your county government. They need to hear from you. They need to know that you are concerned about the air quality where some of your constituents live, and maybe even you yourself live. And someone had mentioned the inversion aspect, that they didn't care because we're in the valley, and they felt that because of inversion, all of the pollution is staying down, and that's done even through the manufacturing process. There's something put in to keep it weighted down. But when I think about all of the adverse weather conditions that we have that lift up houses, that lift churches off their foundation, right? Guess what? It's not staying there during those times, during those inversions, when there's those adverse weather conditions, I believe they're lifting. And if we remember that the earth does rotate on its axis, right? Somewhere in there, it's going around, and someone else is going to breathe it. Now, they may not breathe it at the rate we're breathing it, but they're going to breathe it nevertheless. And I think we need to consider that as well.
Super. Not sure. Howard, do you have any additional reflections on that?
Well, other than I was just receiving some texts from Matt Mihalik, who runs the Breathe Project, that Nippon Steel's goal here was they're tapped out in terms of production and being able to sell flat rolled steel to the automobile industry and for appliances. And that's what this is about, trying to tap into the American market. And the reality is, initially, Nippon Steel didn't even want to acquire the Mon Valley works. That was an issue that got into the whole political landscape, and they were pushed into it. They have this old infrastructure; they can run it into the ground. It's not a very expensive operation, and it's sad, but that's our reality. So. I think holding public officials accountable is the one card we have. And I was seeing in the chat, there was a comment about, well, what can we do? Well, at some point, these permits are going to be put out for public comment, and we can show up en masse to offer those comments, which would obviously be negative.
Super. Boy, we have so many comments and ideas and thoughts and suggestions coming in. I was hoping also, I don't know, I hate to put you on the spot, Edith, but Edith shared a lot of information in the chat about Edith Abeda, who's a core leader within the North Braddock Residents for Our Future. And Edith often has some really great insights into actions that are happening, things that can be done. Edith, are you able to pop on camera and speak to some of the things that are coming up?
Yeah, right now I can't. I'm sorry, but I think Miss Teri and Nathan addressed a lot of the issues, and then I tried to put some of the things that are coming up in the chat. So sorry,
That's okay.
I'm in the grocery store. So
It's no
okay.
problem, Edith. Yeah, sorry about that. I'll relay some of the things that I found that you put in the chat here. You note that July 6th, there's a sign and prep and potluck, a sign prep and potluck at 6 p.m. at 1140 Kirkpatrick Avenue, 15104 zip code. And then there's also July 10th, sign making during Braddock Art Crawl, 5 to 10 p.m. at 6th and Braddock Avenue. The Braddock Borough Council meeting is the second Tuesday of every month. The North Braddock Council meeting is the third Tuesday of the month at 6:30 p.m. And let's see, and then I'll go to you, Ms. Teri, as soon as I've relayed the essentials here. Yes, go ahead, Ms. Teri, and unmute yourself first.
And I would encourage folks to go to the Allegheny County Health Department website. Allegheny County has a climate action plan, CAP. Whether you trust them or not, because a lot of times it goes the same as with voting. People say, well, I don't trust. Well, you're not going to affect change and you're not going to have your opinion heard unless you attend the meetings and you speak up. So I would encourage folks to go on the Allegheny County Health Department's website, look at the Allegheny County Climate Action Plan, make sure you understand it. That's a part of fighting for yourselves and your next generations, and go online. Some of the meetings are online, some of the meetings are in person, and sign up and go to some of the meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Teri. There are many other comments in the chat. Other folks asking how, love to hear how folks can be helpful. Let's see, Melanie Mead asks, is Braddock incorporated by U.S. Steel? I don't know the answer to that. Anybody know? If anybody knows.
I don't think so. Don't quote me on that, but I don't think so.
Okay. It does seem that it was a fairly a federally arbitrated endeavor, like a lot of stuff going on at the federal level, navigating that arrangement. Okay, so we're getting a comment from an audience member that Braddock is not incorporated by U.S. Steel. It is incorporated by the state. So that's a clarification there. That's helpful. Edith Abeda notes in the chat, you can submit comments to Braddock and North Braddock and on the U.S. Steel sewer module. Submit comments to Braddock and North Braddock on the U.S. Steel sewer module before their July council meetings. And from what I've heard, it does appear that Braddock and North Braddock, they have been moved by community concerns. It does not seem to be that the community concerns are falling onto unreceptive ears. And so definitely encourage people to let their thoughts be known about what's going on here. One of the areas that hasn't been discussed in a lot of detail here, but I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget about it, is that as we suffer through a massive heat wave here through a very good portion of the United States, it's worth noting that this new hot strip mill will have significant CO2 equivalent emissions. This is burning fossil fuels to do industrial work. And that's a recipe for climate catastrophe. And I think that we really need to move beyond carbon-based fossil fuels for our industrial activity. And this is, my reflection on that is that otherwise we place upon the present and future generations the same challenges that we've placed upon previous generations, that you have to we're forcing people into the decision of whether you can provide for your family or not, or protect the planet. And and all the families of everybody else all around the world who may be suffering from the worst climate impacts. And very often those are vulnerable communities all around the world. And so I think it's really important to make sure that future industrial investments in Pittsburgh lean heavily on carbon negative at a minimum, or carbon neutral, or at least carbon neutral, or even better, carbon negative technologies. So let's see. Another community comment, people need to get ready for expected upcoming public meetings and hearings pertaining to the hot strip mill installation air permit. Could be as early as late July or early August. And and those meetings will be held by the Allegheny County Health Department. So that's something, often if I write a letter to the editor or something, or try to, it often can take me a few days or even weeks to kind of get up my sense of what I want to say. And I think that this is a really good time to start building your sense of what you may want to say and saying it, finding venues. You can say them into the newspaper, you can say them into these hearings. You can say them at these the borough, the Braddock and North Braddock borough meetings. These are all places where you can say your comments, and also that you can say them once in one place and then say them again in another place. You can just keep reusing your comments. So, Ms. Teri, you have another comment.
I was going to make a comment based on something that you said. And I know a lot of times people think that people who live in low income communities and or people of color don't care because they don't show up at the meetings. When I was in Harrisburg for Action Day for Land, Air, and Water, the lady said, "You staying right next to me because people believe that Black people don't care." And I said, well, we do care, right? But we've been told for so long that we didn't have a voice, and we have to overcome all those generational misrepresentations and all of the bullying. Even now, sometimes I wonder, like, what are they going to do? Is there retaliation? But then also you have to keep in mind that people who work in what we would consider low income or demanding jobs travel the farthest to work. So the distance that they go to work and the distance that they come back from work, add on their 8 hours for work and maybe 9 if they take an hour for lunch, uses up all of their time. By the time they're home and they gather up their children and they feed them, they've already missed the meeting. So you can't tax people for their inability to make it to a meeting, right? But I would encourage anyone who's listening who falls into that category to make sure that you maybe send it ahead by email or by United States Postal Service. Contact whatever organization that's having a meeting or a town hall and ask, how can my words be read or spoken through someone else? And then submit your words that way so that your voice is heard. But we should not tax people who do not have the time to come to the meetings.
Thank you, Ms. Teri. Great comment there. I think we're going to have to wrap up soon. But I want to just check in with Howard. Howard, how are we doing on time?
Well, I think
It's 8:30.
Probably around the time we should be wrapping up, unless there's any other burning questions.
I just wish someone had mentioned Zoom, because I do participate by Zoom, Miss Teri. I can't get anywhere. I can't drive. I'm 85. Please use Zoom for the Allegheny County. You can get your 2 cents in.
Yeah, there is a Zoom option to give testimony. It's not obvious. You have to click that you want to go, and then you might be given a Zoom option after you click that you want to go on the website. So that's something to check out. Phoebe Reese has had her hand up. Phoebe, go ahead.
Really quickly, along the lines of what Ms. Teri said about when the pollution goes into the air, someone else breathes it, and the climate and the Allegheny County Climate Action Plan. The county, I put a link in the chat. You can take a survey. They have some events listed down at the bottom of that site. You can show up in person. When they did their inventory of the greenhouse gases in Allegheny County, the biggest sector was industrial emissions. It was 35%. And of the 35%, 80% was from US Steel. So that's before the hot strip mill goes in. And that's definitely something, that's another avenue to communicate to the community. Hey, this is unacceptable. What are you going to do about it? So I just wanted to share that opportunity, and definitely speaking at the health department is for when the permits, those are great.
Also coming in from the audience, there is likely to be Allegheny County will likely hold an Allegheny County Health Department will likely hold an environmental justice meeting in Braddock, roughly, where people will be able to show up and ask questions of the Allegheny County Health Department. And then there'll also be a public hearing where people can provide testimony about what they want with the permit. So these are all places that are coming. So like we've said before, get your comments ready. It may also be possible, I don't know, another comment from audience member is that we may be able to try to arrange a meeting with Nippon in order to kind of negotiate for some benefits to the community or some other negotiations. I think it's worth asking for big things, and for holding firm on what are things that we won't stand for, what are things that we will. And I mean, I say we. I live about 4 miles away from the Edgar Thomson mill. I get the pollution. I do not live on the front line, so I say we a little bit loosely there, but I definitely am not interested in seeing additional pollution wafting through my neighborhood either. So, and I get it often, but not as much as in Braddock. So I think that's probably good for now. Yeah, and the audience member, the stench certainly affects the whole city. And we see that on the Smell Pittsburgh app developed by the Create Lab at CMU, where you can just see the triangles all over the Pittsburgh region. Great. Okay, so Howard, why don't you go ahead and give us a little wrap up, and we'll have this recording available as quickly as possible for those who may want to review it. And you can also remember download the chat by clicking on the 3 dots to save the chat in your browser or in your Zoom console. Thanks.
I would just want to thank everybody who presented, everybody who attended. Our goal with these town halls since our inception about 5 years ago is to amplify the voices of individuals living in the Mon Valley, living in environmental justice communities. Good for them, it's good for all of us. And there will be the opportunity once these permits are posted for us to be out there and commenting, and we will be sending information out about those opportunities. And just thank everybody for continuing to keep the ball rolling. That's what this is all about.
Very productive tonight.
Thank you, Howard, and thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to all of the audience members who came to share their comments and reflections and questions and make this a really lively discussion. We really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Arigato.
And good night.